Good morning, Heather. How are you?
Good morning, Michelle. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be joined by you. And I know that this has been in the works for a little while. And I want to let our audience know I'm blessed enough to not just know Heather, but know her pretty intimately through our families. And our girls became super great friends on a soccer team that who knew that we would make the connection further into business and really get to know one another on a deeper level.
Yes. And Michelle was brave enough through that soccer friendship to host sleepovers and overnight trips with the girls. So they really had a
And
beautiful
Disneyland. I'm a good mother. That's all I have to say. Thank God you were open to actually having me take them and trusting me with your daughter, who's amazing.
Yeah.
Monty's the most amazing person, and I love Richard as well. So, but beyond our friendship and also that is that Heather is honestly so inspiring to me, and she probably doesn't even know this on this level because I've never really shared it with her. But we talked a little before we got on the call about her poise and her ability to sort of navigate any situation, honestly. And I've watched her do this with such ease and grace through the years, in a way that I would say for my own self, I'm not sure that I actually have. I'm the bull in the china shop. So funny. Anyways, but Heather is actually the CEO of Tamarack Capital Partners. And what exactly is that? That is an investment firm that invests in hotels and resorts. And I'm going to simplify it, right? Because we could go on about, what everything that they actually do. And I'll have Heather explain that. But I wanted to invite her on, and I shared this with her before because she was probably thinking, gosh, you've had so many spiritual wellness people on. Where do I fit? And the whole thing about Opportunity Knocks is really, it's a blend between business and wellness. So for a long period of time, I had a bunch of business people, and then I had a bunch of wellness people. And now we're kind of turning the tables back and really saying, what inspires people? And one thing I know that inspires people is luxury goods. And hotels, restaurants, resorts, those are luxury goods. And I know that Heather will inspire you. So I wanted to start by having Heather take us through kind of her background and how she ended up at, basically investing in resorts and hotels, because I found it fascinating.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. So I did not have a linear path to hotel investing. And I think the most interesting careers often are not linear. My first job out of college, I worked for the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs because I was in school in the late 80s and I thought I wanted to be in business, and for sure the Japanese were going to take over the world at that time. They had just bought Pebble Beach and they had just bought Rockefeller Plaza. So I studied Japanese in college and went to work for the Japanese government in Kyoto, Japan, which is a beautiful city if you ever have a chance to visit. So that was my first 2 years out of undergrad. And then when I got back to the States, I went to work for the Walt Disney Company, which ultimately became the thread to the hotel space. But at that time, I was doing consumer products and rolling out retail stores around the world for them. Shortly after that, I went to work for Goldman Sachs because I thought I've kind of done a government gig, I've done a big company gig, but I don't really know anything about investment banking. And I knew I wanted to go to business school. So I went to work for Goldman for a little while. And then I went to business school. I went to Harvard for 2 years and it was phenomenal fun. We always joke the hardest part is getting in.
Yeah. That's good to know.
Yeah. Good time was had by all during those couple of years. And then when I came back to California, I went to work for the Walt Disney Company again, but this time in the theme park and resort division, working for the chief financial officer. And at that time, it was a super fun sort of series of projects. We developed hotels in Tokyo, we built new cruise ships, we approved the capital for new rides at the parks. We sold the two sports teams in Orange County, so Disney owned the Ducks and the Angels, and we sold those. And then one year I spent most of the year traveling back and forth between LA and Paris, renegotiating, restructuring some financial issues that we had with Disneyland Paris because the French government was a big investor. And it was about $1 billion transaction. And at the end of all of that travel, we announced it in the US press. It was wildly profitable for the company, and the stock price didn't move at all. And I was like, maybe I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
So I knew I loved the travel industry. I loved hotels. I loved the theme park business, but I felt like I needed to be at a smaller firm where I could sort of control my destiny, you know. Having spent
How long ago was this?
That was 2003. So 20 years ago.
Okay.
20 years ago, I realized that all of that effort resulted in no sort of compensation to me personally and no real impact on a company that big. And I thought, I want to figure out a way to have a little bit more direct line between work and reward. And I found a private equity firm here in Los Angeles that invested in luxury hotels. I should be able to talk my way into that based on my experience here. And fortunately I did, and it was a fantastic experience because we were at the time, and this is really where the luxury piece of it comes in, but we were at the time the largest owner of Four Seasons in the United States. We owned Rosewood Hotels and Resorts, or co-owned that management company with the Hunt family out of Texas. We co-owned Tamarack Hotels management company with Prince Al-Walid out of Saudi Arabia. So in addition to owning those management pieces, we would then go out and buy the real estate and put those brands on the hotels and do that kind of thing. One thing that a lot of people don't know about the hotel business is that the brand that you see on the door, whether it's Four Seasons or Aman or Holiday Inn, those brands do not typically own the real estate. So it is a licensing business or a management business, depending on where along the luxury to limited service scale you go. But people like me, whether it's private equity or publicly traded real estate investment trusts, own the real estate. And we then pay a brand to put their brand on the door, and we have to abide by their brand standards and that type of thing to keep it up, but the brands themselves don't own the real estate. And so that's the business that I'm in, is buying the real estate of hotels.
Yeah, so it's actually quite fascinating to learn that. And I know that peripherally because, well, first of all, it's not unlike, like you said, the licensing business. So almost like bringing your business full circle from when you were in consumer products, right? Where you would basically have licensing agreements with all these different people when you were at Disney, right? So it's funny how when I was listening to your background, all I could think about was I always learned something, right? Where I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. I love the fact that you entered many different areas that then in the end sort of is serving this part of your business. Because there's nothing that, say, for example, somebody who might work with you may come to ask you about different parts of your business, but you have the visibility and understanding. So I think a lot of times what happens is, for example, in my case, people will often be like, wow, you've done a lot of different things in marketing. And I think that a little bit like what you're saying, and this is something I'm learning about you, is that you have varied interests. And that it was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Now I learned a little bit about that. Okay, I'm moving on. I'm going to learn a little bit about that. And then it just kind of add to the progression and sort of help build you this portfolio that you're prepared to run your own business.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, one of the things that I like about hotel real estate specifically relative to other types of commercial real estate is that it is an operating business still. So there is, there's a food and beverage component. There's a big marketing component. There's also all of the renovations and designs. We joke that it makes me super annoying at cocktail parties because somebody will say, oh, I design furniture. I'm like, oh yeah, we hire designers all the time. And somebody else will say, oh, I'm a massage therapist. I'm like, oh yeah, we have spas. And someone else did in construction, and someone else is into finance. So it has it lets me kind of play in all different types of areas, from the creative to the financial, and hopefully put it together in a way that is better than the sum of the parts.
Yeah. So then what would you say, like, because you have visibility in all these different areas, like, is the financial part of it the most interesting for you?
To me, the most interesting part is structuring the deal.
Mm. What does that look like? Like, tell me how that works. Like, so you, Heather, I remember one of the times we were on the side of the soccer field and I was joking around about spending some time at this hotel in Palm Springs, and you're like, "Oh, we own that," and I was like, "You do?" And so then I was like, "Well, how does that work?" So I always find it interesting to understand, like, you know, how that works. How do you structure a deal? Like, you're like, "Oh, that's for sale. It's just like anything else."
Sure. Yeah. So I think the most important thing, the most important skill in our industry, and I think it applies to most, is the ability to negotiate. So I sort of look at every deal we do as kind of a 10 different types of negotiations that will probably happen.
Mhm.
Most of what we buy has been brokered, so not dissimilar to residential real estate that most people are familiar with. There are brokers involved in commercial real estate, but not all. Sometimes we buy direct from the sellers, but typically, let's say a broker's involved, they'll send an email out that says, you know, XYZ hotel is on the market. Here's a handful of things about them. You know, sign up this confidentiality agreement. We'll send you all the details.
Mhm.
Then my that, and we will basically project out what we think, how we think this hotel will perform. So how much revenue, how much cost, what's the bottom line cash flow for this hotel over the next 5 years. And then we'll say, okay, if we put in another $10 million to renovate it, or if we built a new ballroom, or if we change the brand, or if we change the manager, how do we think that 5-year cash projection would change?
Mhm.
And is that a burn to put all that extra money in or make all those adjustments? And we try to find some kind of secret sauce in every deal that we do so that we're not just buying whatever broker's selling and, you know, we're not just trading at basis, we're trying to add value. And
Mhm.
so we're looking at, it's a little bit like house flip for hotels, but it has a few more levers. It's not all renovation related, but you know, we'll be negotiating with sellers, with lenders, with our capital partners, and with managers, and with designers and architects and contractors. Sort of at every step of the process is a new negotiation, and if you can do those well or do most of them well in a deal, then you should be able to create some value.
Yeah. So what do you think makes somebody a good negotiator? Just curious. Because I actually full-heartedly agree with you. I personally love the process of negotiation. And we talked about opportunities before we got on the call, right? And I think a lot of women really dislike the process of negotiation. And in fact, actually, it's a known fact that women, when they receive their salaries from the HR people, don't always negotiate. And we
Right.
all know that there's always room for negotiation. So, what do you think makes a good negotiator?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One would be having some vision or perspective on what you think the future is going to be. And it may, and hopefully it's different from what the person across the table from you thinks, so that you can take advantage of that difference.
Mhm.
Other is trying to understand what the other person needs out of the deal. And I'll give you an example, and I'll try not to name any names, so I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but we bought a hotel once that was on a ground lease with the city.
Mhm.
And we went through the process that was in the lease. We had a purchase option. We went through the process in the lease, and the resulting price was very, very low. And we prepared the paperwork. We sent it into the mayor's office, and I got a call back from the mayor's office that said she's not signing it. I said, why not? Like, does she think something's wrong? Did we not follow the process? You know, here's the timeline, here's the this and that. I kept referring back to the documents, and they said, she says she can't sign it, but she'll talk to you about it. So I said, okay. So I flew to this particular city. I met with the mayor, and I said, what's going on? She said, politically, I cannot sell you this piece of land in this location for that price, even if everything in the contract says we're supposed to. So I guess you're just going to have to sue us to enforce it, something like that. And I was like, this is a terrible outcome.
Yeah.
But we also had a relationship with the city in that our hotel was immediately adjacent to their convention center. And there was a lot of back and forth between the hotel operation and the convention center for that. And so I said, well, what if you gave us more favorable terms on those agreements and we paid you more for the land? Because she's like, politically, I just can't have that printed in the newspaper.
Yeah.
That the city sold this parcel of land for such a low price. And I was like, what if you pay us more on this side and we'll pay you more over here so that your headline price works for you? Knowing that in my business, we get paid a multiple of our income. So if I get $100 from her on this side, it is worth 10x that to me.
Yeah.
Whereas $100 over here is worth $100 to her. Mm-hmm. So we were able to come up with an agreement in which she got a better headline price. The city wasn't embarrassed. We could get the deal done. Very favorable acquisition, while also generating significantly more permanent fee stream on the other side that we were able to then sell at a multiple. So all of that is to say, if we had just walked out of the door when she said, I can't sign it for political reasons, that would have been a disastrous investment. But having found kind of another piece of the relationship that we could leverage in a positive way for both of us, but turned out for us to be very, very good.
Yeah, I think the word that comes back to me that you said earlier is about adding value, right? And you were not willing to actually walk away from the deal. You wanted to provide a different solution or a different perspective that in the end was going to add them more value too. So it's like win-win, right? How do we each walk away successful in this deal, right? And I think, they always say that the first person to discuss money loses, but in effect, if you're able to actually provide value to each person and you're not afraid to go there, right? Like it sounds like going back to your composure and your poise, that I could just picture the like smile on your face and be like, okay, let me figure this out. Let's take a different route.
We'll be back.
Exactly.
And I know it sounds cliche to say it's win-win in its relationships because those words get thrown around a lot. But I do think having a multifaceted relationship with people that you're in business with gives you the opportunity to negotiate better outcomes for both sides. Because if you're just in a one-time transaction and it's just A versus B and it's a zero-sum game, it's very hard to find those opportunities. Mm-hmm. But if you have a multifaceted relationship with people, and we think of our business as a very long-term relationship game, we like to do multiple deals with the same capital partners, the same lenders, the same brands, because we find it more efficient, and we find the bigger the relationship you have with people, the better you can understand their needs, and the more likely you are to find something that's going to work better for them.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I don't think we're just talking about business relationships. I think that's, if there's a way to build loyalty and trust, right, and I love the idea that you talked about a multifaceted pronged approach, because I think people often, let's just look at it from job search strategy, right? Because it's not any different than any other transaction. But like often what happens is people are like, well, I only know the finance person there, so therefore I'm not going to apply. And you're like, well, the finance person knows the marketing person, and knows everything. Person knows the PR person, and the PR person knows the HR person. What do you know? And so I think the thing is so often, I love what you're saying because people stop themselves. And this goes back into opportunities, right? It's like, well, how do you create an opportunity from nothing? And I love the fact that you're talking about relationship building, because that's really at the core of every interaction.
I think so too. I think the other thing, and I heard, what's it called? I heard a really interesting author speak the other day. She's a CNBC correspondent, and she wrote a book called When Women Lead.
I like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that she pointed out was that women also often talk about the present and what's working, what's not working, and women tend to get very granular and detail oriented in what's currently happening, and that men on average, and obviously these are generalizations, but on average will spend more time talking about the future. They will be in there pitching, whether they're entrepreneurs who are pitching for venture money or they're negotiating something, they will go into a room and talk about vision and future, and here's where I see my company in 5 years. Here's what we're doing. This is where we're going. This is how we're going to get there, as opposed to this is where we are today. And I think that ability to kind of
perspective.
Yeah, to pull back and to really set that view for someone that you're talking with is incredibly valuable. And when you're talking about a job transaction, when someone's applying for a job, for someone to be able to go into a room and say, yes, it's interesting what I have done, and I have my resume and I have my background. I'm happy to talk to you about that. But this is where I'm going. This is what I'm doing. This is the career that I'm interested in building. And hopefully your company fits in along the way. Yeah,
I like the way that you're describing that, that both are needed. And and I think the thing is that you're right. Like any given person, even though statistically I know that we're saying men versus women, any given person has that ability to do both if they know that that's something that's needed, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you a question about impact. So, okay. Impact was my word last year. I always pick a word for the year, and impact was my word. It didn't manifest in the way that I thought it was going to, but again, one of my goals is to remain unattached to outcomes. Coming from the corporate world, and your world is all about like being attached to that number, right? Yeah. And my world is about being unattached to perfection. So. Yes, the balance of that's why we're friends, the balance of the two. But my question for you is, how do you think one makes an impact these days? Like whether that be in your business, because your business is shifting and changing, obviously post-pandemic, starting to revive, but also now we're hitting an economical crisis, right? Mm-hmm. But like, how does one make an impact?
Yeah. I think people make an impact in small ways. So I think a lot of people want to save the world, they want to save the earth, they want to accomplish these incredibly huge and lofty goals. But I think you make an impact one person at a time. And we tried very hard during COVID to be thoughtful about, we laid off a lot of people at hotels. It was a very difficult decision. It was a very difficult time in our company and in most other hotel companies. But we tried to do it in a way that was thoughtful and fair, and we gave people timelines, and we made sure that their health coverage continued, and we had reasonable severance programs, and we called back the people who had been with us as quickly as we could reasonably. But I think you make an impact one person at a time, whether that's in how you conduct yourself in really difficult times like that layoff period, or whether it's how you address individuals who are more junior in their career to you, who you can give a hand up to, or create some opportunity for. We have a big hotel conference coming up at the end of January. So the Sunday night beforehand, I'm hosting a dinner at my home for women, because commercial real estate investment is 97% men. And there are lots of women who are attorneys and designers and managers and people who are in the ecosystem. But the folks who make sort of the cash decision, am I going to invest $100 million in that property? Very, very few women in that role. And so I try to mentor, not really just be a mentor myself, but create an environment where folks can come together and talk about what's working, what's not, how can I help you, who are you hiring, anything like that, to try to be on a very small scale impactful to other people within the industry.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's so important. Mentorship is so important in the success of future generations, and sharing and being open about it. And I think you led me right to what my next question was going to be around, like being in a male dominated industry. Was it difficult for you to break in, or was it welcomed? Like I've always thought I'm not great at finance. type stuff. But I think I would have actually done really well in investment banking from the perspective of like relationship building, but also being a guy's girl, right? And I think that, but it's not always easy, right? Because you're in the minority and you have to kind of tolerate a lot of good old boy mentality a bit.
Yeah. You know, I think for me personally, I have very good fortune to work with terrific people, men and women, almost exclusively men, but a few women as well, who I always felt judged everyone on their merit and on their outcomes. And I felt, you know, I have felt very fairly treated my whole career. And I know that is not the experience that a lot of women have. You know, my time in Japan is an interesting sort of juxtaposition, because had I been a Japanese woman in my role in the early 90s in Japan, I would have been treated, I think, very poorly, very differently than I was. But because I was an outsider and
Especially in Kyoto. I mean, not even in Tokyo, in Kyoto. Yeah.
Because I was an outsider and I was already different, I wasn't really relegated to their norms and their rules. And I was sort of, you know, the rules were kind of carved out a little bit.
It's okay because she's American. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that way, I think I had quite an advantage being foreign and female. Had I been foreign and male, maybe I would have had a greater advantage, but I don't really have that lens to look through. I just feel like I had a very nice seat at the table, given my non-Japanese-ness at that time, even though I was a very young woman. I was 21, no experience, so really nothing to hang my hat on. I will say it's noticeable in the real estate industry. I went to a big industry event a couple months ago at a restaurant very close to my home. And I walked in and I looked around at just a sea of white men. And I thought, oh, I could spin around on my heels and be home in 5 minutes and have dinner with Richard and Montgomery. And that sounds really tempting, but I'm not going to do it. I stuck it. Ended up being a very nice evening, but it was so palpable in the room that other men commented on it to me. This is crazy. There are no other women here. I'm like, yeah, I know. I have seen that.
You're like, glad you're finally aware.
Yeah. It was
awareness is a big step, by the way.
I think so. But I feel like I've been treated remarkably fairly. And what I hope for is that I don't do anything to give women a bad name in the industry.
I can't ever imagine that, to be honest.
No, but you know, you want to be sure that if you're given the position of being role model is probably too big of a word for what I would be, but if there is any of that, then you want to make sure that you treat it gently and with respect, and make sure
when we talk about making like small impacts and stuff like that, and we talk about like bringing, like, how do you bring in more women into the real estate investment business then? Like, how do you encourage them? I know you have the group, but like, how does it, I mean, because I understand, like, it's the same thing we talk about, like having young children, right? It's like, well, okay, get them involved in STEM, right? But it feels like there needs to be more direct targeted recruitment, right? Just like on socioeconomic and ethnicity and, you know, cultural DEI.
Yeah, exactly. I don't have a great solution for it because, like in many fields, when you look at students going through universities, when you look at sort of entry-level jobs, there is a tremendous amount of diversity, gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and when you get to CEO and CIO positions, there's almost no diversity at all. Mm-hmm. So I think it is, and I bet if you rewound the clock 20 years to when I was starting, in a junior level, there probably weren't as many people in the funnel. There weren't as first candidates in the funnel. So I do think things are moving in the right direction. And I try to make a very conscious effort. If there are two people in an organization that have, similar roles, and I know one is a white guy and another is a woman or a person of color, I will try to direct my business to the woman or the person of color. Yes. So that, you know, whether they're my attorney, designer, lender, I want to make sure that those people are getting our business. Yeah. To help them grow their careers.
So I appreciate that. I think that's definitely the wise way to go for the future as far as like having more diversity on all levels. What they, you know, when we look at, like, you're a founder, right? And obviously having had all these different years and different experiences, how did you go about knowing that these were the partners that you wanted to join forces with?
That's
great. Some people don't want partners.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because when I started my firm, I spun out from another firm and I basically brought my team with me.
Okay. And
at the last firm, I was a partner and they were junior. And when we started together, I made all three of them partners. Mm-hmm. And that is probably a uniquely female approach, because I think people, you know, most men probably wouldn't take that approach. But part of the strategy was to keep the team together. Mm-hmm. Folks were starting to get, you know, a little bit frustrated that the senior people at the top weren't working as hard. Not me, of course, but no. But that was actually part of the reason why we changed. Was it felt like, you know, that firm had been around for a long time, and the folks who were at the very senior levels were getting a lot of the benefit, and the folks at the junior levels were doing a lot of the work. So part of starting the firm was a retention strategy. I mean, first and foremost, I wanted to have my own firm. Mm-hmm. And when I was deciding on title, I even said to Richard one day, I was like, should I just say CEO? He's like, of course you should. What else would you call it? I was like, I don't know. It seems so self-presumptuous to, you know, give myself the CEO title, but I am the CEO. So,
and that's such a woman perspective.
Completely.
Yes.
Completely.
Like, God forbid you actually get what you are, you know, yeah. What you deserve.
Yeah. So part of it was the team was together there, and we made the decision collectively to leave, and I led that decision and negotiated the exit and all of those types of things. And it was important to me to try to structure the new firm in a way that wouldn't have the same perceived pitfalls that the old firm had, that the people who were doing the work had a great opportunity for economic benefit from it.
I love the fact that it's such a team approach, right? Mm-hmm. A very collaborative team approach. Like, we, again, going back to, we all win, you know? But I have another question for you about, because I'm just not that versed on this, is that what makes a good real estate investment in specifically a hotel? Because obviously that's the area that you're in, but I'm assuming it probably is not that indifferent than a residential property, possibly. But I'd be interested in knowing, because in most of the cities that you own, I mean, obviously they're resorts, so they're like in pretty well-trafficked areas. So how do you know, like, when you were talking earlier about, like, well, is it a well-run hotel? And we know, just like a restaurant, you could have a horrible manager and then you change the manager, and next thing you know, everything runs properly. So just curious.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things. First is location, because it's basic, like that's basic real estate, right? You want to be in a market that has demand drivers that are 7 days a week, 365 days a year, ideally. That can't always happen, because there are also some great markets that are very seasonal. Ski markets and beaches and things like that happen to be very seasonal. But we try to stick closest to markets that have good year-round demand and 7-day-a-week demand. There are also some markets that are very great for business travel, and you would never go there on the weekends, and those can be a big challenge. So location is first. And the other thing that I really like in order to try to drive outsized returns is finding something that has been a little bit neglected. So if it's a good box in a good location, but it's been undercapitalized or poorly managed, you know, the ability to kind of go in and say, I could see this very differently in the future. Mm-hmm. I could see completely renovated with a great hop and bar in the center and, you know, a bunch of changes to the management as you described, that's when you really get good returns, because if you buy the best asset in the best market that's already performing at the top, you're going to pay an extraordinary price per key for, and therefore your returns are not necessarily going to be as good. But if you can find a good value by maybe finding a nice box in a great location that's really been undercapitalized and neglected, then I think you have the opportunity for outsized returns.
Yeah, it's funny when I read your it's an interesting perspective, and it's not unlike, like we were saying, like residential real estate in some ways. But
Yeah.
I learned something when I read your bio earlier was about the price per key, right? And I was like, oh, I get it, like per room, or you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's is a very, I think it's like we all want the rundown thing that has potential, right?
Yeah.
As long as, and it's just like anything else. Do you have the visibility, or the, like, you have a vision, like you have a great vision to know how, what you can actually turn it into. So I also wanted to ask you, we talked a little bit about this before we got on the call, but like, is there anything that you feel like you really missed in your entire life? Like something that you really felt like, wow, I really wish I would have, say, for example, went to Harvard undergrad as well, or, you know, something that was missing?
What is missing? I mean, I wish our firm were bigger. You know, I wish we were managing more institutional money. So I feel, again, kind of looking to the future more than what's missing from the past. Like, what can we affect? What can we deliver going forward? I do think, you know, the way we're structured, we raise the funds on a deal by deal basis from one large institutional investor. I think at some point in the next 10 years or so, I would like to raise a big institutional fund and manage money for pensions and endowments and those kinds of guys. Not because I would be doing that much different day to day, but because it's just one more step in the ability to control your own destiny and to really kind of have ultimate decision-making power. And that sounds a little power hungry, but I think there are times—
I think there's freedom in it.
But I think there are times when institutional investors tend to get a bit of groupthink. You know, everybody goes risk off, everybody goes risk on at the same times. And the other way you can really generate outsized returns in our business is being a little bit contrarian and making the bet correctly when you are contrarian. Now, it's much harder to bet correctly in contrarian times, but if you do, then should be able to deliver really nicely.
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't know this about me, but between business school and going back to Disney, there was a little period of time where I worked at a flower shop in Laguna Beach on PCH, and it was fantastic. And it's probably been my second favorite job to this one. Just that people walk in, they need something for their friend or their mom, and you have the opportunity to create it. So I also would love to get back to really tactile, hands-on, you know.
Yeah, because there is a very creative side of you too,
yeah.
And that you don't get to exercise very often. It's funny, you know, we share that. I used to want to own a flower shop too.
We could do it together.
We could do it together. It would be so fun. Although I will say, have you ever worked at a flower shop during the holidays?
Well, I stayed through Valentine's Day. Got my job at Disney because I felt like I couldn't leave them the week of Valentine's Day, and that is a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. Wow. Like I just remember, like I was just, and it's kind of just like anything else. If you're a creative and then you have to create during stress, it's like, whoa, you know, like. But I do love the idea of flower arranging. In fact, actually, in my first women's groups, that we used to actually use flower arranging as a way to get out of your head and use things tactily. Yeah.
Nice.
It's a good exercise. Well, I always end every interview, but I don't want to end this one, but I have to, because we all have to get back to work. But I would love to know what your top 5 core values are and how you use them in your day or everyday choices.
My top 5 core values. I think honesty. So straightforward with people. And I think that's particularly hard when the people are close to you. So if it's close colleagues who are underperforming or something like that has happened, I think honesty is really important and will get you sort of over the edge of whatever that underperformance might be. Relationships. I spend most of my time as a CEO of an investment firm is not actually spent analyzing the numbers. It's actually spent building relationships. Yep. I think being goal-oriented and future-minded is a core value that helps set you up for success and keeps you on a path. Now, it's a path and change the goals and that type of thing, but setting goals and being goal-oriented, I think, is incredibly important. One that I struggle with sometimes, but I like to think it's a core value, is being strategic. There was a funny notepad that I saw once that said, "Focus on top-level shit." And I was like, oh, I need that on my desk, because sometimes I sort of fall into, the tactical and the mundane and the day-to-day, and I am constantly trying to remind myself and others around me, you really need to try to be more strategic, because we're a very, we're a very thinly populated organization. We're a very flat organization, and we kind of need everybody,
all hands on deck
all the time.
Probably teamwork and collaboration is probably on yours.
Yeah, and then I would say the last one, and this is maybe more personal than professional, but this is
they're all intertwined.
Yeah, something we talk with Montgomery about a lot is kindness.
Oh my God, that's exactly what I was going to say. If you didn't mention it, I was actually going to say, can I mention one?
Yeah, kindness.
Yeah, I have to say, so it's interesting because I think what happens often in, when you obviously have the role that you do, are in the industry that you're in, and in the generation that we both come from, our worlds live in silos, like where it's like your professional world and your personal world, right? And in future generations, things were all integrated, but I still hear in your language a little of the separation, right? But to me, the core of who you really are, and I didn't say the word kindness before we got on the call, but really is a kind soul. You really always give your last little bit of time for somebody. Like, I've seen this where I'm always like, wow, she's willing to do the extra little bit. She must be exhausted, but she's still going to do that. And I think that speaks volumes to your character. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. When I see it, I name it. Honesty.
Honesty. I like that value in you.
I thank you. But I just want to thank you for your time, and thank you for shedding so much insight beyond just business and commercial real estate and investing and all those things, because a lot of the things that you talked about are things that people need in their everyday lives. And I think right now, my belief system is these future generations are missing some of these integral things that are necessary for paving success.
Great. Well, it's been fantastic catching up with you and talking with you. I'm really, really happy for your podcast and all of your ventures, and so flattered that you included me in it. Thank you.
Of course, anytime, my girl. Okay, well, we will speak with you soon, and have a wonderful day, okay? Oh, by the way, can you tell people where they could reach you? I know you're not big on Instagram and stuff like that. That's fine, but they can reach you on LinkedIn, right?
Yeah, they can reach me on LinkedIn.
And it's just Heather Turner?
I don't know what it is, but I'll send it to you.
Okay, we'll make sure that it's on the Instagram page and on LinkedIn when we repost. Okay, thank you. Great. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.